Welcome to Losi Fanta Audio Adventures. This series is about true stories that really happened. Stories in which men twist themselves into knots, women mercilessly play out their quirks, and no one can seriously claim to have acted out of pure reason. Told with biting wit, humor, and delightful sarcasm. Enjoy listening to the things people do out of love, lust, or desire, and bitterly regret. Experiences caught between heart and body.
A school dance, a bottle of tequila, a very open-minded lady, a taxi, and the fine art of looking away. I was young back then, legally adult young to be precise, which is exactly that dangerous age where you're convinced you figured out life, even though all you've really mastered is how to open a beer and look vaguely grown up while doing it. It was the weekend. That sacred stretch of time during which, as a young person, you live in constant fear of being asked on Monday what you did, and having to answer, honestly, not much. Weekends meant obligation. You had to go out, experience something, do anything that you could later recount with mild pride and severe secondhand embarrassment. So I met up with two friends. We sat together, staring at each other like three philosophizing goldfish in a bowl that was clearly too small, desperately trying to figure out what we could do. Ideas were born and immediately executed. Too expensive, too boring, too embarrassing. At some point, someone said the word school dance. That word had magic in it. School dance sounded like a dance floor, music, alcohol, and, most importantly, women. Lots of women. At least in our imagination. Realistically speaking, the odds of actually meeting someone there were roughly on par with winning the lottery using a scratch card you found on the sidewalk. But hope had always been our strongest drug. So the decision was made. We put on our finest suits, all of which looked like they had survived several family celebrations, at least one funeral, and an embarrassingly drunk uncle. We examined ourselves in the mirror, nodded approvingly at one another, and for a brief, dangerous moment, genuinely believed we looked good. A taxi was called. We got in and set off, armed with overconfidence, youthful recklessness, and a level of self-esteem based entirely on unverified assumptions. Once we arrived at the school dance, we did what men always do in situations like this. We surveyed the battlefield. We scanned the room. We searched for looks, for signs, for anything that might give us hope. Within minutes, however, it became painfully clear that about 90% of the people present were either already taken or protected by an emotional barbed wire fence. The rest looked either uninterested or like they might file a police report if approached. So we did the most sensible thing possible. We went to the bar. Alcohol, after all, is the lubricant of society and the glue that holds fragile self-confidence together. We drank, talked, laughed at things that would have been deeply unfunny while sober, and played that familiar game where you pretend you have the evening under control. At some point, we sat down at a table with a few empty chairs, just sitting, breathing, existing. And that's when she walked over. She wasn't wearing a ball gown, no romance, no restraint. She wore a miniskirt, high heels, and a blouse with a neckline capable of triggering diplomatic crises. Along with that came two arguments that stood in the room so confidently you almost felt compelled to greet them. Without asking, she sat down with us as if that seat had always belonged to her and casually asked whether we wanted something to drink. That alone threw us completely off balance. Women don't usually do that. Especially not with three guys who looked like they'd borrowed their suits from a secondhand shop for failed magicians. Naturally, we said yes. She said she had tequila. At that moment, I internally lost all interest in everything else. Tequila has this magical ability to instantly drown out all moral, logical, and long-term considerations. She placed her handbag on the table, opened it, and actually pulled out a bottle of tequila, presenting it like contraband treasure. She proudly explained that she'd smuggled it in because the drinks here were expensive and tequila worked fast. In our condition, this didn't sound like a problem. It sounded like a strategy.
Although in retrospect, I have to admit that about 90% of my interest was focused on the tequila bottle and maybe 10% on what she was saying, which, frankly, was more than enough. At some point, she brought up the age question with a sober clarity of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and what she definitely didn't. She was of legal age, she explained, and anything under 18 was about as attractive to her as lukewarm chamomile tea. My first friend chose brutal honesty at that moment, made himself a year younger, and was instantly eliminated faster than you can spell self-sabotage. I told the truth and received that polite, emotionless smile people reserve for someone they've already mentally dismissed before the conversation is officially over. Then it was the youngest of us, a guy with big dreams, virtually no experience, and that enviable conviction that success in life is purely a matter of wanting it badly enough. A walking experiment in how far confidence can go without facts. He was the spiritual cousin of Jonah Hill in Superbad, just without a script, without irony, and with much higher stakes. Without hesitating for a second, he said, with an earnestness that was almost impressive, that he was 18. Just like that, he aged 2 years, became significantly more mature, and, in his own mind, presumably irresistible. The truth took one look at this, shook its head silently, sat down in a dark corner, and decided not only to take the night off, but to quit entirely. From there, everything moved quickly. They flirted. They got closer. They started making out. And not the cautious, romantic kind of making out. This was the aggressive, world-forgetting kind that makes you wonder whether politeness requires you to look away. We sat next to them, kept drinking, and pretended we were part of the evening rather than unpaid extras in a scene we never wanted to witness. Later, when we were all sufficiently drunk, the happy friend came over and said we should head home. We agreed, since our decision-making skills had clocked out hours earlier. Outside, a taxi was waiting. I sat in the front, my other friend behind me, with her in the middle, and next to her, the man who currently believed he had achieved his life goal. The ride was supposed to take about 20 minutes, which isn't very long, unless you're sitting in a taxi where it suddenly becomes unnaturally quiet. That particular kind of silence where you immediately know something is happening that you neither want to see nor process mentally. I slowly turned around and was confronted with an image that instantly made it clear that poor road conditions were definitely not the reason for those rhythmic movements. She was sitting on my permanently hormonally charged friend. The miniskirt had migrated somewhere halfway toward the North Pole, and everything about the scene screamed youthful bad decision under the influence of alcohol. I looked at my other friend, who stared back at me with a mix of shock, disbelief, a crooked grin, and mild nausea, and simply nodded. At that moment, we realized we were unwilling eyewitnesses to a very private milestone, one that really should have involved curtains, candlelight, and significantly less public transportation. The taxi driver spoke up at exactly the wrong moment, dryly remarking that it was suspiciously quiet back there. I instantly received an internal emergency assignment to save this ride, and began frantically dragging him into conversation. Traffic, weather, construction, inflation, anything was better than him even considering the idea of turning around. I talked as if my life depended on it, which, in retrospect, didn't feel entirely inaccurate. When we finally arrived, everyone got out, I paid the driver, and he looked at me with that expression people have who've seen too much to still be surprised. He just said he hoped the lovebirds hadn't left any stains on the seats. They were hard to get out. We grinned. What else were we supposed to do? Then we went inside. Living room for me and the other unsuccessful friend, privacy for the hormonally driven pubescent womanizer, and the woman who clearly had no issues with unfamiliar furniture. What happened after that thankfully stayed out of our direct line of sight, though it was acoustically present enough that even the walls probably blushed. Sleep that night was more of a theoretical concept than an actual option. And so the evening ended with one friend losing his virginity, a taxi driver collecting yet another chapter for his personal therapy sessions, the back seat, hopefully, remaining stain-free, and me finally understanding that a school dance is rarely what you imagine it to be. Instead, it's an absurd stage play where alcohol directs, common sense leaves the theater early, and morality hands in its resignation before intermission.
Thanks for listening. Honestly, respect for sticking it out all the way to the end. I hope you had fun, or at least felt a tiny bit called out. Maybe you even thought, thank goodness that wasn't me. Don't worry, the next story is definitely coming. And next time, too, it'll be about the things people do out of love, lust, or desire, and later regret. Until next time on Losi Fanta Audio Adventures.